All right, if you got a Bible, meet me in Exodus 32. Exodus chapter 32 is where we're going to start. We're going to move into Exodus 33 as well, and we'll cover some big territory. So if you've got a Bible, you can get in front of you, power up or open up. That may be helpful to you. But Exodus 32 for part 6 of this teaching series that we've called the Supernormal Life. At the end of Moses' life, God and the people closest to him twice say that he was a person that over time learned how to walk with God face to face like a person walks with a friend. So we've been looking at scenes from Moses' life to see if that's possible for personal encounters with a supernatural God to be a supernormal part of our life. This week we're going to look at two fairly familiar scenes, if you're at all familiar with the life of Moses, that show us what I think are two really uncomfortably relevant ways that people like us tend to miss out on the opportunity to experience supernatural in supernormal ways. But also we're going to see Moses' example for how to get it right there in Exodus 32. If you were with us last week where we left off the story, Moses had gone up onto the mountain into the presence of God, where he's going to spend 40 days and 40 nights there in the presence of God, receiving the law for the people of Israel. The 10 Commandments, but then also some others. And do you remember why God gave all of those commandments? God gave all of those commandments because he wanted the people of Israel to experience the blessings that he had promised to them. So remember, God made a promise back in Genesis chapter 12 to Abraham. He said, I'll give you a land. He said, I'll give you a seed. And he said, I will give you a blessing to make you a blessing so that all of the nations of the earth may be blessed. And you remember how many conditions God put on those promises? Starts with Z, rhymes with hero. 0 conditions. We call it an unconditional covenant. There is no if you, then I will. There's no as long as you do or as long as you never do. God just says, I will do this. We said, kind of like my wedding vows. Like Carrie didn't place any conditions on her vows to me. She just said, I will till death. But having been married now for 20 years, I've learned that even though there aren't any conditions on being married for me, there are more than a few big things and small things that can affect my supernormal experience of being married. That's sort of what these commandments are that Moses is being given. We call them the Mosaic covenant. And in them, God says to the nation of Israel, here's how to experience the blessings of something that I've unconditionally promised. Here's how to experience them in supernormal life. That gets us to today. So change the illustration just a tiny bit. Okay, I want you to imagine that you are a person who isn't married but would love to be. Okay, some of you don't have to imagine that at all. You're waiting for the right person. Just imagining this perfect moment where Mr. Right shows up and gets down on a knee and gives you a ring. So you're on the dating apps. Because you're on the dating apps, the algorithm knows. Because the algorithm knows, the jewelers know. And one day you're minding your own business there on the internet and you see an ad for the perfect ring. It's perfect. So you buy it. You start wearing it around everywhere you go. You're showing it off to your friends. You do the whole ceremony thing with your sorority sisters. Like everybody cries, everybody hugs. I'm so excited. I can't wait to meet him. And you say, me either. Like, I don't know him in real life yet. But I know he's out there somewhere. I don't have a relationship yet. This is just a symbol. Because someday, we're going to know each other face to face, the way a person knows a spouse. I'm not in a relationship now. This is just symbolic. Now, how's that going to fly with your friends? How's it going to fly with Mr. Right when you go on a first date someday? Like, oh, no, I'm not in a relationship with somebody else. This is symbolic of you. I mean, maybe you. I mean, you didn't give it to me, but you could. It could represent you from here on out forever. How many more dates are you going to have after that moment? Starts with Z, rhymes with hero. That gets us to Exodus chapter 32. beginning in verse 1. Exodus 32, beginning in verse 1. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him." Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings, brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day, the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Do you understand what they're doing? They're hanging around there at the bottom of the mountain for a month and 10 days, rescued in the past, but living in between the land of their past and the land of the promise. And they're tired of waiting. They're tired of wandering. They're tired of Moses being the one who gets to encounter God in person and relate God's words and God's will for their supernormal lives. Why does this fellow get to have these encounters with a supernatural God in his supernormal life, and we don't? Why not us? Why not now? Which, pause for a second, those aren't bad questions, are they? I mean, a version of those questions are our questions for this series. Are supernatural encounters with God and supernormal life just a Moses thing? Or could it be, maybe even should it be, an us thing too? Back to this earlier illustration, this is like the person that desperately wants to get married, is tired of waiting. It's over being the bridesmaid and never the bride. So what did the people of Israel do? They buy a ring and put it on. Actually, they take the rings off, the ones that they'd carried as plunder out of Egypt. They give them to Aaron, who, verse 4, melts them down and uses a tool to fashion a calf out of gold. And then notice in verse 4, they, not just one guy, said, "These are your gods." And actually, I'll spare you the lesson in biblical Hebrew. You could also translate the word gods, plural, as God, singular. If you want to geek out, it's called a plural of majesty. You can Google it later, but I think it's better to translate this that way. Singular. They said, "This is your God," because it's just one calf. In verse 5, Aaron built an altar, and he says, "Tomorrow we're going to celebrate a festival to who? To the Lord." It's all caps, the personal covenant name of God. They're not suddenly becoming polytheists here. They're not even necessarily switching gods here. Something way more subtle, and unfortunately a lot closer to home for us. You see what they've done? The people trade God's majesty for a mascot. They trade God's majesty for a mascot. So majesty is the idea of something or someone bigger than you, someone different from you, who in some ways or some cases rules over you, who knows better than you. Majesty. And you know what a mascot is. I've got some funny examples of mascots that would offend a few of you, but I only allow myself to make fun of Sooners and Texas Tech fans one time per series. I've already used that up. So let's do a simple one with a home team, okay? TCU, we cheer for the Horned Frogs, right? So here's a horned frog. Yeah, not bad. Not bad. Now, who's the TCU mascot? What's his name? Super Frog. Okay, here he is. Super Frog. So notice this. You can tell what kind of animal Super Frog is, right? Like he resembles a horned frog. Nobody wonders if Super Frog's actually a bear or a pony. Yeah, that's kind of the point. But we also know something else too. instinctively. Super frog, not actually a horned frog. With a mascot, you take the real thing as a baseline, and then you accentuate or minimize certain characteristics in order to make it into something a little more ideal than the real when it comes to whatever you're wanting it for. So, real horned frogs don't have triceps. They're strong in other ways. But super frog, we want him to look strong the way that we think of strong. Real horned frogs don't stand on 2 feet. They don't wear football jerseys. They don't have hand cramps. Whatever that is that super frog is doing. But we want super frog to represent the ideal, not just the real. To represent the perfect blend between majesty and you and me. Do you see here in Exodus 32? That's what the people of God have done. Rather than engage the supernatural God and who he is on his terms and in his time, they decide to make a mascot, a symbol of God that would represent the supernatural God and their supernormal life on their supernormal terms. Now, is that just something that less evolved pre-modern people did that enlightened people like us would never do? Or is that a temptation for us with God? Is it possible for people like us to form or shape a mascot God, either in real life or in our minds, that's identifiable as God, the God of the Bible? Nobody mistakes our God for Allah or for Krishna. But if you look very close at the God that you're imagining or the God that you've shaped, you compare him to the God, you begin to realize that your God never disagrees with you, never disagrees with your politics. Your God always feels the exact same way that you feel about your enemies, about your opponents. The things that don't bother you don't bother him. And in fact, his primary role, think of Super Frog, is to encourage you to do more of what you're already inclined to do. The things that you cheer for, he just encourages you to cheer more for. The things that you boo, he boos too, like a mascot. Is it possible, here's the question, that one of the reasons you and I don't experience supernatural in our supernormal life is that the God we're expecting to encounter is a God that we've shaped and formed to be a blend between majesty and you and me. Something that God refuses to ever be. Back to Exodus. God hears this festival, and he's not flattered by the mascot. He tells Moses, stand back, I'm going to destroy him. I'm going to start over with you. And Moses, you can read the chapter, intercedes for his people. He actually volunteers to take God's wrath on himself on behalf of the people, which is just a little foreshadowing in the Bible to someone greater than Moses who will show up for Christmas in a few thousand years. Moses says, God, don't do that. Don't destroy them. If you destroy them, then the other nations won't see who you are through them. So God says, okay, here, I'll make you a deal. Look at Exodus 33, beginning in verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go up to the land, check this out, I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way. Okay, look closely at this. What's God's offer here? God says, I made you an unconditional promise. Land, seed, blessing. to be a blessing. So here's what I'll do. I'll give the people what I promised, but they're going to have it without my presence. God offers the promise without his presence. Okay, stop and think before we see what they decided. Would you take that deal? Okay, don't just give the answer that you think is the right answer. Give what you believe is the real answer. God says to you, promised land's yours. Your enemies get run out of town. You get to live in freedom and comfort and prosperity and opportunity for the rest of your life. Your sins are forgiven. You won't go to hell when you die. But the supernatural presence of God will never be supernormal for you. In fact, the supernatural God will always be distant from you. Would you settle for that? Have you settled for that? Don't rush past this. Okay, God doesn't do this. But if God gave you one chance this morning before you came to ask him for whatever you want from him, would his tangible presence in your supernormal life have shown up on your list? Because I'm not sure it would have shown up on mine. And that bothers me. I hope that bothers you. I heard a friend of mine say something the other day that really stuck with me. He said, one of the enemy's greatest tools in our culture is to seduce us to trade God's dreams for a purely secular version. That's really what this is about. Ask just about any of us. What do we really want in life? What are we really praying for if we could ask for anything in life or out of life? What we would hear, likely what we'd say, what I want a great place to live, comfortable, not too much. I want a romantic relationship with a person that I stay physically attracted to, who's reasonably well-adjusted. Somebody who wants the same number of kids that I want, wants to have them when I want to have them. Somebody who's interested in the same things that I'm interested in, or at least pretends to be interested in the same things I'm interested in without letting on that they're just pretending. Like one vacation every year, maybe every 3 to 5 years, one that makes all of my friends go, whoa, you went where? Love to have a meaningful career. Gives me just enough financial success or accomplishes just enough good in the world that my college friends are jealous and my high school flame wishes they'd end up with me instead. Like to retire with some gas in the tank and enough health and money to enjoy it. Love to be universally admired by strangers for my wisdom and my contribution to the world, and then die in my sleep and wake up in heaven. It's not that those things are bad at all. It's just that every single person on the planet who isn't even interested in Jesus wants those exact same things out of life too. You're designed to pursue something bigger than that. I'm not sure it's anything having to do with the promise or prosperity, but I'm increasingly convinced it's the pursuit of God's present tense presence with us and within us everywhere we go. The people of Israel got this, don't they? Look at verse 4. Exodus 33, verse 4. When the people heard these distressing words, did they strike you as distressing? They began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments. Even this, what God calls them a stiff-necked people, say, no deal. But skip down to verse 7. Notice something. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Notice this next word. What's the word? Say it out loud. Anyone. Okay, who was invited out there? Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the anyones, all the people rose and stood at the entrances to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshiped, each at the entrance of their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to the camp. But his young aide, Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. Who was invited? Anyone. Who went? Moses and Joshua. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. And at least one of the reasons, it seems, is that although anyone was invited, Moses went. And what happened there in the tent? Verse 12. Moses said to the Lord, "You've been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You've said, I know you by name. You've found favor with me. If you're pleased with me, teach me your ways so that I may know you and find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." The Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Then Moses said to him, "If your presence doesn't go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you're pleased with me and your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "I will do the very thing you've asked because I am pleased with you and I know you by name." And then Moses said, "Now, show me your glory." Moses said, "God, I'd rather have the wilderness with you than the promised land without you. Otherwise, what's going to set us apart?" And you say, well, the rules. Remember last week? Like the rituals, your morals, your values, your good behavior, your religiosity. But we talked about that last week. Those were designed to set them apart, but not just to make them marginally more moral people. Not just to make them a little bit better with all of their friends and their neighbors and their enemies. All those commands, all those commandments were designed to set them apart, to point towards his presence among them and with them wherever they went. So that when their neighbors and their friends and their enemies noticed that the presence of God was present, they were never confused about which God it was. And Moses calls that out. He says, look, I don't want to just pick a better religion. I don't just want to be marginally more moral than other people. I don't just want to go to heaven when I die. I want to see you, God, while I live, and I want to show you to others where I live. So that's Moses' prayer. He says, God, show me your glory. And we've talked about glory a lot because the Greek word for glory, doxa, it's the first half of our name as a church. Glory is the way that God shows up and shows off who he is and what he's like. Moses says, I want to see that, God, as much as I can stand of who you are, what you're really like in person, in my supernormal life. That's what I'm after. And you may know how this goes. We've talked about this passage several times before, so I won't say everything that we've said in the past, but God says, look, you can't see all of it, because if you saw all of it, it would destroy you. You can't handle all of me. But I'll show up in person, Moses. I'll show you enough to be able to distinguish between me and anyone or anything else. I'll show you my back. And here's the point. God doesn't answer Moses' prayer fully, but he does answer it faithfully and unmistakably. And I'm convinced, come on, that he'll do the same thing for you if you ask him. He may not answer it on your terms. He didn't, Moses. He may not show up on your timetable. He didn't for the people of Israel waiting there at the bottom of the mountain. But if we're reading Moses' life right, and check my work, you can read it too. Don't let me be the only one going to the tent, reporting back. God's desire is to answer this prayer for you. It's not just for you to follow a moral code or to pick the best religion, or to pick a God with the right politics, or who makes promises that you like, or gives you wisdom that will help you live a more prosperous life. He's a God that wants to be present with you. He wants to reveal himself to you. He wants you to encounter him, the supernatural God, as you walk through your super normal life. Look, let me just shoot real straight and then I'll close. Some of us have settled for letting somebody else, me, or some other pastor, or a parent, or a friend, go to the tent while we worship from a distance. As long as the representative gives us a report that we like, that matches the mascot that we've made, and as long as our life circumstances stay reasonably up and to the right, we're willing to settle for the promise without the presence of God. I'm just begging you not to waste your life like that. And frankly, I'm begging you to keep begging me not to waste my life like that. I don't want a second of the promise of God without the presence of God. And I don't want to settle for a self-made version of God who represents my ideal and always something lesser than what's real. So what do? I want to learn from Moses, who points us to an even better promise. Not just a God who sets up shop outside the camp. Moses points us towards a God who came near to tabernacle with us. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. John, Jesus' best friend, says, we have beheld his face. Like we've beheld his glory. Jesus shows us who God is and what he's like. He came to take away everything within us that kindled God's wrath, to take it upon himself and to move it outside the camp so that there is nothing to prevent us from drawing near except a stiff neck or a hard heart that says no thanks. That's maybe a step for some of us this morning, perhaps for the very first time, to say, God, I do want your presence. And I've only ever worshiped a mascot. But this morning, I'm trusting the real you. Jesus, that he came and diagnosed a sin problem that I have inside of me, that he died to pay its penalty, and he rose from the dead to give me that life that you've promised, that you desire. And I want it too. More importantly, I want your presence with me and within me for good from here. I am putting my trust in Jesus today. That's a step for some of you. The invitation for a bunch of us this morning, it's not just an invitation for this morning, not even primarily an invitation for this morning. Maybe just to begin this morning, to examine some places that we've turned his majesty into a mascot, that we've settled for his promise without his presence, or where we've just sent somebody else outside the tent on our behalf, instead saying, I want to see it. Lord, show me your glory. What would that look like? Well, everything within me wants to give you 5 easy steps or 10 quick disciplines or practices or rituals. I've given some of those throughout this series if you're really curious. But actually, I want to point to 2 things. The invitation here in Exodus 33:7 was for anyone who wanted to inquire of the Lord to do it. So maybe that's the step. Rather than asking me what it would look like, ask him. We're going to give you some space to do that right in a minute here in our service, to inquire of the Lord. What would it look like for me to live into this rather than all of the other things that I live for? Or perhaps just to ask what Moses asked. Lord, show me your glory on your terms, in your time. But I'm just going to keep asking. I want to see your face. I want to see you supernaturally show up and show off who you are and what you're like to me in my supernormal life. And Lord, from here on out, nothing else will do. Can we do that as we prepare to worship? I'm going to give you some space to do that. Would you bow your head with me? Worship team's going to come back out and lead us in a song that's a confession of this, a chance to sing what we just said. You can sing along with them, or you can simply inquire of the Lord yourself right where you're at. To tell him where you've been, to tell him what you've done, and to tell him what you're trusting today. To inquire of the Lord right where you're at. Father, that's the cry of our heart. And I pray for the person that showed up today, Lord, for all of us who showed up having settled for a mascot, having settled for the promise without your presence, Lord, that today would be a day that changes everything, that we walk out from this place committed to seeking you, to seeing you, and to walking with you everywhere we go. Nothing else will do for us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Church, would you stand as we respond in worship this morning?
I'm caught up in your presence. I just wanna sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment. I never wanna leave. Oh, I'm not here for blessings. Jesus, you don't owe me anything more than anything that you can do. I just want you. Oh, I'm sorry when I've just gone through the motions. I'm sorry when I just sang another song. Would take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you. Only you, only you. And I'm sorry when I've come with my agenda. I'm sorry when I forgot that you're enough. So take me back to where we start. I open up my heart to you. Oh, I'm caught up in your presence. I just wanna sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment. I never wanna leave, never wanna leave. Oh, I'm not here for blessings. Jesus, you don't owe me
Hey, thanks for watching. If something you heard resonated with you today, we would love to connect with you. Visit doxology.church/connect or leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's message and you want to see more, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.